Hello, welcome back to Becoming Well-Informed Friends series with Worldview Connections. This is part two. I'm not going to reread everything that's on the screens for this part. If you want to pause it and read through it, if you feel like I'm going through this kind of review at this beginning part. But the basic gist is saying that we need to go by primary sources and using the church's archives and information right now that is being made available, we will be able to get into some important, meaningful topics. But really, it's getting into the fact that the leaders of the church have encouraged the members not to be lazy, get out there, get informed. In other words, do your research. So hopefully what I share here is to help you. Growing up in the primary, I sang that song, Follow the Prophets. And the leaders of the church today, considered by the members as prophets, seers, and revelators, are telling the people to get out there and know the research, as I have shown in video part one and now in part two. This is progress. Let me just refer back to part of my past. In 2007, I was young, married, young father. And this was the church manual for Relief Society and Priesthood, 2007. The Teachings of the Presence of the Church. This was Joseph Smith's. And as shown in this image, this was a Sunday school manual, and it explicitly stated that the lessons will not discuss Joseph Smith's plural wives, the polygamy, polyandry issues, things like that, and the law of consecration, and various issues. But you can see now that the church is more transparent, and I applaud that. I think that's great. I celebrate that. So now we have the Joseph Smith papers and the gospel topic essays we're going to try to get into. This is a picture of Willard Richards. He was the secretary to Joseph Smith. And these are his journals that are detailed with fascinating things. I encourage you to get out there and read these things. Let's become well informed about Joseph Smith. Let's go to another church resource, the Family Search, that the church has put a lot of money into this. And here is Joseph Smith's profile and birth, December 23rd, 1805. His death, 27th of June, 1844. So we're going to get a glimpse of a few things having to do with his plural marriage during the latter part of his life. The fact is that they're showing at least 31 marriages featured on his timeline on Family Search. I put an arrow on these ages here. I was confused. These are the ages this is indicating Joseph Smith's age at the time of that marriage. So when he was married to Emma Hale, he was 21 years old. When he married Fanny Alger, which the church is considering this as a marriage, she was 16 years old. So I'll be presenting various perspectives, right? Neutral, for and against. So you're well informed of things, the arguments that may come against you. But these are historical facts. This is showing you once he started marriage, these were secret marriages, but these documented in the church history. As you see, there's also notes by these women's names. Some notes I found a group of women, not all of them, but some of them who later married Brigham Young after Joseph Smith's death. So Louisa Beeman, Zina Huntington. So within the few years after his death, these women married Joseph Smith, who were married to Joseph Smith, later married Brigham Young. On these other women, you see the label polyandry. So these women were married to other men when Joseph Smith was, quote unquote, sealed to them, some spiritual sealing. And there are various perspectives on this. I remember watching Richard Bushman, the author of Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling, and a patriarch in the church. I remember him saying to Brian Hales, is a researcher in the church. I'll refer to his website in a minute. that uses church resources and a lot of documentation. Again, we're using primary sources here. But him telling Brian Hales that, yeah, there are debates. People are debating, oh, were they sexually involved? And Richard Bushman said, well, if you believe these wives were given to him from God and they were sealed, then sexuality would not be considered a sin in that worldview. So obviously, critics look at these relationships as adultery. And so there's two sides to looking at this. And this is a very troubling issue to many people in and out of the church. But these are some of the names. Go on to the next one. Here are more of his wives documented in Family Search. Again, you see some of these women. Eliza R. Snow was later married to Brigham Young just within the year of Joseph Smith dying. Now look at Eliza Partridge and Emily Partridge. They were sisters, and they also were both kind of handed on to Brigham Young. It reminds me of when Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 19 is asked about if a man dies and his brother marries his wife to have children. I'm not going to cite the whole thing, but if you will look in Matthew 19, Jesus is asked about that. Interestingly, in that scripture, Jesus says there's no marriage in heaven. So there's another side of a debate there about marriage. And he says that there's no marriage in heaven. Anyway, but this kind of reminds me of that because it's ancient Israel called it concubinage. In other words, a man would die and another man would take his wives for him. And we do know that Brigham Young was having sexual relations with his wives. Moving on to other women, those married to Joseph Smith. And it's interesting because once you get into 1843, and according to these documents, this is when Joseph Smith was marrying, again, after Fanny earlier, but these are girls that were 15 years old, 16, 14 years old, 16 years old. And you can see their names here. You can go on to Family Search and look this up yourself. But I went on there and screenshot all of these and pasted them in here and framed them. This is church resources now. I mean, like I said, almost 20 years ago when I was in church, they didn't even want to talk about this. So awesome. They're getting it out there now. Some argue it's because the internet is here and forced the leaders of the church to do this. And some view this as inspiration. The leaders are inspired by the Lord. So there are many worldviews to approach this. This is just a chart. I'm not going to be on this very long. Again, if you want to pause it and look at it, this is just showing the timeline. If you're going to go by mathematical grids and graphs, the X line is the horizontal line. That's the age of Joseph Smith at the time of marrying the women, and going up vertically or on the Y-axis line, it's the age of women at the time of marrying Joseph. And so you see a lot of these, just a spectrum of ages of the women. And it also notifies here, I verified this on the Family Search, that some were concurrently married at the time Joseph Smith married them. Some were men in the leadership. It wasn't a matter of them being married to a man unworthy. Some historians look at this as Joseph Smith building a dynasty. It's like anything in life, right? You have a historical primary source. There's a picture, there's a letter, and you're going to have 1,000 interpretations of it, right? But I think it's valuable to get into the facts. And when you see this, research what I'm showing you. Don't believe me. Don't take my word for it. But let this be kind of a launch pad for some of you who've never looked into any of this. The gospel topic essay is the plural marriage in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's the introduction we're going to get into eventually. This is a painting of Emma, and in the center is Joseph Smith and Emma speaking to the Relief Society that Emma was the first president of. And on the right, this is the Smith family home in Nauvoo. This is really when Joseph Smith's plural marriages, polygamy, polyandry skyrocketed. So there are research documents between 30 to 40 women. There are those who they believe that Joseph Smith was not practicing polygamy, that this was a lie that Brigham Young had presented that he had basically took this religion into a polygamous trajectory, as you will. And so there's a whole other worldview on that. But I mean, honestly, guys, I go by historical documentation. I am one of those many who believe that Joseph Smith. I mean, I don't believe, it's right there, a lot of historical data, and I don't think these women were lying about that. I know there's a lot of different angles on it, but I think it's insulting of a lot of people to discredit women. I think there's a form of chauvinism there, doubting them and what they're saying. We're going to get into some of those. You also look into the plural marriages and families in early Utah, and there's a picture of Brigham Young and some of his wives and another polygamous family. I want to look into a case study. Let's just look into a situation of one family. You have the Newell K. Whitney. Those familiar with a little bit of church history, he was very significant in church history with Joseph Smith. But his daughter, Sarah, was one person that Joseph Smith, he was sealed to her. It's really interesting because in this letter, we can click on here and getting into the letter of Joseph Smith to the family. It gets into his revelation on this, why he wanted to be involved. But here's his signature on that letter: your companion and friend, Joseph Smith. And his letter to Newell, his wife Elizabeth, and their daughter Sarah on August 18th, 1842, talking about how they should meet him, especially at a time when Emma's not going to be there. Basically, when you read the letter, it sounds like if they get there and Emma's there, she's going to be upset. He seems to be suggesting that they would be in physical danger. Emma's going to be angry. So you can pause this and read her brief life history. But it is interesting to note that when they were sealed, her and Joseph Smith, Sarah and Joseph Smith, there's another page of biography on the Joseph Smith papers. If you look up her name, there's a lot of information. But she was 15 years old, and he was 36 years old. And so this gets into a moral issue, right? A lot of people feel like this is immoral, and there are some people argue that women were married at that young of age, but people argue that, yeah, there were women who were married at this age, but not to men that much older. It'd be a 15-year-old girl married to a 16 to 18-year-old man, but the average age was not actually that young. Anyway, you can research that. But I just want to show this documented in the church documents now. An interesting thing is that Joseph Smith had Sarah married to a man, Mr. Joseph Kingsbury. Even in Family Search, it shows these marriages within a year of each other. And this is confusing to a lot of people. What's happening? This Mr. Kingsbury was married to Sarah's sister, who passed away. So there's multiple perspectives here, right? There's questions about why this was happening. Concerns from a woman's perspective is, are these women being treated fairly? Were they given consent? And that's a big issue on this. And I'm going to leave it to you to make your judgment. Was this marriage meant to hide the secret plural marriage? Joseph Smith arranged a pretend civil marriage between Sarah and Joseph Kingsbury. Sorry, I put C there. I meant to put K. Apologize. Edit that part. But was Mr. Kingsbury acting as a front husband, if you will, shield Joseph Smith and Sarah from public scrutiny? Someone assumed that it was not consummated. And so, this gets us into something interesting. I've heard somebody ask, why don't we have DNA of Joseph Smith? He had all these wives. They didn't have children. And some have argued that, well, if these women were pretending to be married to other men and they were getting pregnant, nobody would have noticed. They wouldn't have noticed anything out of the ordinary, wouldn't have had any concerns. Another question some people have is, I've wondered this myself, if it wasn't about sexuality, then why couldn't they be sealed to him as sisters? Why couldn't they be sealed to him as spiritual nieces, daughters, granddaughters? If he's creating an eternal family dynasty in eternity, why did it have to be a wife? And people say, well, that's Abraham, and it's the trial of faith, the trials of Abraham. Critics of the church hate that perspective. They see this as just the front of Joseph Smith's sexual addiction or his adultery. There are various worldviews on this. But the fact is, if you go into Joseph Smith's polygamy, Brian Hales, he has documented a lot of stuff. Again, this is a lot of church records, photography, documentation, letters, diaries. So yes, this is a website from Dr. Hales. It's not an LDS church website, but as I said, I'm citing historical documentation. And if you look at his information, it's really impressive. So Joseph Smith's secret relationships, it is you get into this multiple perspectives, right? Questions from members in the church, historians, researchers. Why? Why was Joseph Smith doing this? Why was he saying publicly he was only married to Emma? As the quote, he says, I only have Emma. People say there's these wives. So concerns, again, from a woman's perspective, some women have found in these letters and journals that some of these plural wives of Joseph Smith prayed and did have a witness to be his wives. So people are complex, and I think history is complicated. Humans, social sciences, I've been teaching for 15 years, and when I teach history, it's complicated. You take the evidence, you take the data, the research, resources that we have, pictures, letters, and we all have the same evidence, and there's different worldviews and perspectives on that. But then you get to the end of Joseph Smith's life, and he was with his brother Hiram. And so on June 27th, 1844, their lives ended. Very traumatic experience in the jail, Liberty Jail. And I think it's interesting, though, to look at that. This is just one case of Joseph Smith's many relationships with women. And there are other ones to get into, go into Joseph Smith's papers. There's a lot of information about Joseph Smith soliciting Sidney Rigdon's daughter. That's, if you Google search the happiness letter, and they have a copy of all of these things documented on the church Joseph Smith papers and the website, and also with other wives that were younger. So thank you for joining us today. And this is part 2. We want to get into other aspects, but whether we get into those or not, I encourage you to go on there and read, become well-informed. Don't be a lazy learner. That's not good. Get out there and learn. And I think if you're going to share the gospel, you have to be able to listen to others as well. You can't just be one-sided. You can't just talk. I think one thing I learned from my mission is that it's good to listen. Served my mission in 1997 in Chicago, and I look back on some of it and I didn't listen very well. I think it's respectful to listen to others and to not straw man them. In other words, that means not make them out to be an idiot, but to be respectful of their views. We can agree to disagree, and we can do that. LDS Apostle Elder Cook said, you can do that without being disagreeable. I'm paraphrasing. But I think this is important to know history. And I think it's important for many people like me who our family are a part of this. My great-grandfather, Isaac Chauncey Haight, we'll probably get into some of his stories with the Mountain Meadow Massacre, if you look up that name. But these are important to me. History is important to me. And I hope you have enjoyed this and join us again. Feel free to look at our other videos. There's videos we have about religion and moral issues and other life skills as well. I also have some of my music on there, some song ideas. So worldview series on art and music. I hope you have a good day. Thank you.